Here we're going to look at the 4 phases of demographic transition. So remember, we're going to start at level 1. And in level 1, there's a low level of development within this society. So they have a very high birth rate, and it's matched by a relatively equally high death rate. So people are having a lot of kids, a lot of them are not necessarily surviving, and so the population remains stable. Birth rate and death rate are relatively equal. Now in phase 2, some key things start to happen. We have an increase in our development. So we start to come about with some technologies, things like, during the Industrial Revolution. And so the key thing that occurs is the death rate as a result of these technologies and medical advancements and things like that drops significantly. Much fewer people are dying. But the birth rate for a good period of time fails to drop as well. So even though very few people are dying, relatively speaking, our birth rate remains very high. And so when the birth rate is much higher than the death rate, we're going to start to see rapid growth. And this is what is happening in a lot of these developing nations. Their death rates have dropped dramatically, but their birth rates remain high, and so they have this rapid growth. Once we get into phase 3, the society has reached a relatively high level of affluence. This is like the United States at the moment. And what has happened is the birth rate has fallen as a result of affluence to meet the death rate. So once again, we have created a situation in which birth rate and death rate are relatively equal, and so our growth is going to slow down and stabilize. And so remember, generally as affluence increases, the birth rate is going to decrease. And once it hits towards that death rate, now we have a either slowly growing or relatively stable population. Finally, in phase 4, these are countries that have reached a very high level of affluence and development. And the key thing that happens here is, in many cases, the death rate can actually go above the birth rate. So now more people are dying than being born, and the population can actually start to decrease. And this is happening in a number of places like Japan, places in Europe that have a high level of affluence, and their birth rates have dropped so low that their populations actually start to decrease. So again, if we look at this all together, the main takeaway is it is the relative lag of the birth rate behind the death rate that causes the major population increase, and then it will level out once those two rates come back together. And we're going from basically a low affluence society in which we have stable because we have high birth rate and death rate to a high affluence population which is stable because we have a very low birth rate and death rate.